All right, just as a reminder, tomorrow the class is going to start at 1:30 because I have something before this. Any questions about that? Okay, and then the first reading response is due at midnight on Friday, tomorrow. So the form is on the course website on my portal. Basically, if you can't think of anything else, just summarize the readings. Okay. But what I'm looking for is just, I want you to be thinking about the course. I want you to be thinking about, how this connects to how you understand gender, or what it tells us about World War I, what it tells us about 19th century gender roles. And in particular, if you can connect the films, the lectures, and the readings in some way, that's great. Now, I'm not expecting, a finely polished paper. This is a reflection, just sort of spit it out. I am not expecting quotes, so just, show me that you're thinking about it. This being Northland's last course ever, I'm not going to be too harsh on the grading. So just think about stuff, pick an angle, talk about something that interested you, or that you can connect to that experience you had with your Uncle Bob at Thanksgiving 5 years ago, or
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Or if you have an outside film that you think is relevant that you want to talk about that's connected in some way, if you want to focus in on one theme in one of the readings, or the movie, etc. So any questions about the reading response? Listen.
These two, you already answered one of the three that were in the
Okay.
earlier email, but the two are basically, do I need to talk about all of the readings?
No, I'm not looking to be. I want you to just pick something that interests you and talk about it.
So I could, in theory, just talk about this one reading and this one film, and
Yep.
then read about everything else.
Absolutely, that'd be fine.
And my second question is, do we need to have a single angle or a single thing that I'm looking at, or could it just be basically a checklist of all of my thoughts and connections, even if it's this one connection isn't necessarily related to this other connection?
That'd be fine. I mean, I think it'll depend on how insightful or good your connections are. I guess my thought is that you'll just sort of pick some angle and talk about one thing, but if you talk about multiple things, that's fine. I'm not gonna be too harsh on that. Any other questions? The form says 3 pages tight of double spaced. That's obviously if you want to do single spaced, 1.5 pages. I'm not going to be marking it up. I don't know if you guys know this, but the reason professors always ask for things in double spaced is because they're expecting to mark it up. But I noticed, I realized about 1.5 years ago that all of my students' papers suddenly stopped having typos. I read about when ChatGPT showed up. So I don't really go over your papers anymore because everybody's just nice and cleaned up. Any questions? Any thoughts?
What are you getting up to when Northland closes?
I do not know yet.
Mind your business.
Yeah.
I would like to keep teaching, but I am at the wrong age.
Yeah.
I am old enough that most schools would say, "Oh, younger guy's cheaper," and I don't have a great publication record because I was department chair and I did a whole bunch of committee work and stuff here, and so basically I might find a teaching job
Could you like teach high school history or something, or is that?
I could, although you need a high school teaching
Okay,
license.
yeah.
They do usually give you an extra bump in your salary for having a PhD. But I could probably, they're so short on teachers, I could probably get an emergency credential for a year or two and teach while I'm getting a master's in education, basically, to solidify that.
I just think it's a shame if you don't go on teaching your
Yeah, you are really good.
You might be my last class. I think the place I might be the most competitive is moving up, like applying for dean jobs,
Oh, yeah.
associate dean, that kind of thing. Because I have the service record for that, and I'm at the right age for that, and so we'll see. Who knows?
I think it's weird that you can teach university, but then if you want to teach high school, you need another degree for that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's because there's like more of, like a structure to like
Well,
more clear. What they
Yeah,
want.
there's colleges are often private, which means that, I mean, private high schools, you don't need a credential for that either. So that would be an option actually if I wanted to go that route. But
my high school physics teacher had a PhD, and she did not understand that everybody was in high school, and we didn't understand physics.
yeah, well, I think public schools have often had oversight because it's public money and everybody knows what public schools do. They want to make sure it's being done right, and so having those credentials and all that, DPI requirements, et cetera, is a way of showing the voters that we are keeping track of public school and making sure it's rigorous, et cetera. And private colleges, nobody's checking up on that. And I think also the assumption is by the time you are an adult learner, you don't, the instructor doesn't need knowledge of childhood development stages, et cetera. You just got to teach your subject. So there's less of a thought that teaching in public schools is seen as a science of childhood development, et cetera, in a way that college teaching is not. Yeah.
In your career, like as a professor, have you ever had to kick someone out of the room?
I've had to tell someone to shut up.
Okay.
I've had to tell someone to not come to class that stoned.
That's a rough.
I had a guy in the middle of class, it might have been this room, he's like, man, these blinds are really cool. Cut it out, man.
To shut up.
What?
What were they doing?
I had a student who was prone to having very strong opinions about very esoteric topics, and he would take a class and take students would be talking about something, and he would go on this tangent and just start monologuing for 10 minutes.
Was this recently?
And no, it was years ago. And he just kept going and going, and he'd start to get more agitated. He's getting really excited, and he
And you
goes,
have to be like, we gotta get back to
yeah, I mean, I remember saying, just stop. And he's looking at me like, what? It's like, you've been going on for 10 minutes. But I've never kicked anybody out. If you want to be the first.
Yeah.
What would it take for Elena to get thrown out of the classroom?
So, tell me about Gallipoli. What do you think of Gallipoli? What did you notice about Gallipoli? Other than Australian accents.
Is it the speakers in here, or like, can anyone else just like not understand what anyone is saying in any of the movies?
The accents.
I can understand them.
Okay, I can-
somewhat.
I can-
Exact points that I can't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The uncle I find hard to hear in Gallipoli.
Is
But
the
Okay.
uncle the like one who's training him at the beginning? That's his
yeah,
uncle.
with the beard.
Yes, he has a very like strong accent or something.
And a low voice, which doesn't come across,
Yeah.
and Andy's also got a way of talking that's sort of terse, and he blurts it out, and by the time you can't figure it out before it's over.
I really like the like juxtaposition between Archie and Frank.
Okay.
Like, and I mean, I'm sure it'll like their characters will change, and that'll be interesting to watch. But I really just like how they're both like they're like kind of fast friends, and they're both like athletic young boys, and they like want to travel and kind of see the world.
Mhm.
But I really like the like juxtaposition of like Archie sees this war as like going off to fight is like the honorable right thing to do, and also it's like an adventure. He can like be like his uncle who went and traveled the world before he was 18.
Uh-huh.
Whereas Frank's like kind of the perspective of like going to this war means you're gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And I want an adventure in life, but I'm not gonna sign up to go die.
Yeah, right. I would also point out Frank is Irish. I hope that came through with the father scene.
Yeah,
and the Irish
Hate the British.
hate the British, but they basically sat out World War I because the British were in it. I mean, it's like we're not getting into that. And I mean, they had a little thing of Irish independence going on too, but
Yeah, they have the-
but
those little
the
trophies.
Irish really, I mean, when this movie happens, which is 1915, the Irish have not gained independence yet, so they are still basically a British colony, and they hate the British. And so going to fight for the British is not easy. Sydney, you've had your hand up for a while then.
Going off of Jackson's point, I took note, I don't know if this is a stretch, but when they were walking through the dunes, his outfit was fully white and Frank's was fully black, so kind of going off of that dichotomy of like, oh, a hero like an angel is going off to fight for his country, and then Frank like, oh, I'm not gonna do that, that's not our fight, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, and they're, blonde and brunette, and, I mean, they've cast it well, kind of.
I don't know we're not really there yet, but I don't know what happens after the scene we're at, where like he can't ride the horse, so I assume he probably gets shoved into like infantry instead of cavalry, and I'm wondering what the survival rates were.
I don't know for the Australian, New Zealand Expeditionary Force. I'm not sure what we can talk. They had horrific death rates. I mean, lots of people died. But aside from that first few months where I talked about where 85% of people were getting killed in these units, you had a fairly good survivability rate. I mean, obviously it's not, if you were told you had that chance of dying in a car, you wouldn't get in the car, but it's not as many people died in the military as you might think. I mean, but of course, the longer you're in it, the better your chances are of dying. So,
I'm sure riding a horse into machine gun fire isn't very effective.
yes, that is not.
Horses will get taken out pretty easily.
Yes, turns out horses are big targets. Now, horses were all over World War I, but yeah, once you get trench warfare, there's no use for a horse. There are no cavalry charges across no man's land with that mud and those craters and the barbed wire. The horses are just not going there. So.
Okay, this is a very, very weird question. But why didn't they try to utilize emus for some purpose during the war? Because there was the comment, I don't remember who made it, but somebody in the Australian army did basically see that if tanks had the bullet carrying capacity of emus, they'd face any army in the world. So why did they actually try to do something?
I do not know. I think emus are not wrangleable. They're
famously, Australia had a huge problem with emus, and they tried to and get rid of them, and the emus were not easily gotten rid of.
Post World War One.
Oh, okay. They haven't yet lost to the emus.
No, not yet. the three Australian doughboys that were sent to fight them. Yeah.
With 2 machine guns.
Yep. And a truck.
Yeah.
So do you
And
guys
the one.
see gender playing in anywhere in here yet?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
The Archie, is that the brunette guy? Is that his
No,
name?
Frank is
Archie's the younger one.
All right, Frank wasn't big on joining the military at all until they met that family, and as soon as the women started pressuring him, he was like, "Oh well, now I feel demasculated. I can't let these women think I'm some loser who doesn't do it." And so he was instantly might as well join them.
Okay. Any other thoughts on
Archie did literally call him a coward for not going off to fight, which I think says more about masculinity than it actually does about bravery versus cowardice.
that? Mm-hmm.
Well, also, I thought what was really interesting was kind of early in the film, Archie and his uncle have the conversation where Archie's like, I want to go off to the war, it'll be an adventure. And he brings up how his uncle, when he was the same age, went off and explored, it sounds like explored Europe as a young kid.
Yeah.
And then by the time he was 18, and then he kind of came back a man, was what the subtext was I got. And then like that was Archie saying like, I want to go off to this war so I can become a man like you.
Yeah.
Like kind of emulating him. But then what was really interesting was like the next scene was the uncle reading the ending of the Jungle Book about like, which is about like a boy goes off into the wilderness, has a grand adventure, and returns to civilization a man.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
so like that parallel of like this war is like both like a kind of a code of honor thing, but also like for these Australians, it's an adventure to go see the world and like come back a man.
Uh-huh. Does that word mean anything to anybody?
Yeah.
It's German.
Coming of age.
Yeah, this is the German word for novel. Romance comes from romance. This is a development novel is literally what it means, but there's a standard trope in literature of young men going off to have an adventure and coming back a man. And so it's a process of becoming a man, growing up through the trials of the adventure. And so, you know, Huck Finn sails down the river with Jim and comes back a man, and you know, Harry Potter, you know,
Tip goes off to London.
yeah, it goes off to Hogwarts, and by the end he's a man. It's a very standard trope, and war novels often do this. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is that All Quiet on the Western Front implied that that's what they thought they were doing, but they didn't, because they all wound up dead. And even if they survived, when Paul was still alive, he's like, no, this didn't work. I mean, I did not become a man, I became broken, and I can't live in society anymore. I mean, the assumption is that when you become a man, you can take your place in society as a productive member, etc. But he's like, no, war breaks you.
That was what I found interesting in the, like, at the very end of when we're reading the novel, the first chapter of the novel, it was like, they call us youths, how funny. We're not youths, we're old folks. Like, it's not... They didn't graduate into adulthood. They're right to
the senescence.
Yeah, like
yeah.
elderly, like Jerry being like on their deathbed essentially immediately.
Yeah, well, I mean, to a certain extent, he's also just saying they're now old souls.
Yeah,
they've seen too much, and they are beaten by life, and they are, yeah. So that's an interesting. It comes out actually much more in the novel with lines like that. The whole novel has this sort of theme that. This is supposed to make us men, but it's not. Listen.
There was I don't remember exactly where, but there was a quote from I think it was World War I or World War II veteran that basically said that it's not the dying that gets you, it's the killing, and like that reminds me of the scene where in All Quiet on the Western Front where Paul stabs the French soldier,
Mm-hmm.
and like how it goes from like, you know, he's like, the soldiers on opposite sides, this is war, he did what he had to do, to like he just killed somebody in a completely non-honorable way, and like that's kind of the first time he like really breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of think that like that's an interesting kind of perspective on war movies especially, but like really that scene.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that scene or on coming of age, or we can move on to the readings since we sort of did. Did you all notice what's going on with the two readings?
Yeah.
The remark reading is All Quiet on the Western Front. Came out in the early 20s, was a big hit. Helen Zena Smith read that. She was an ambulance driver in France during World War I, and she wrote the novel Not So Quiet, which is a fictional account of her experiences in the ambulance corps. But I don't know if you noticed, but it's an exact mirror of All Quiet on the Western Front. And I gave you the first chapters of both of them with this sort of scatological stuff and the intimacy, and then Tosh is Kat, you know, the older sort of rough edges but heart of gold leader of the group, and you know, so she's basically writing the novel as a mirror of All Quiet on the Western Front, but it's about femininity. It's about womanhood, but and essentially she's coming to the same conclusion. We sort of thought this would make us adults, women, and it didn't. It's not. It's ruining us, and we're losing our ladylike qualities. We're losing our femininity here because of the lice and because of the, all the conditions we live in, the lack of bathing, and we're losing our femininity. I just thought it was an interesting.
Yeah, and like the part where she's talking about writing home to her family and being like, oh, like, I love it here. Like, things are great. I feel like I'm really doing my part. It was like really similar to like how, I guess like the teacher in the movie was like talking about like, oh, this is great. Like, you'll go there and you'll like become a man. Like, it's gonna be awesome. And she was like, this is like all that they will hear from us. And I thought it was interesting, like, as a man, when like Paul came back and he was like, no, like, that's not how it is. But like, as a woman, she was like, yeah, like, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, she had to maintain. I would put it slightly different than what you just said. Is that she had to maintain a set of expectations for femininity, and it's unladylike to bitch about the lice or the food or whatever. So she can't do that, right? Listen, and what?
Yeah, I also think that's interesting, like the difference between, like what she said would happen if she basically told them like the truth about it, and like what happens when Paul actually does. It's like he basically gets called like, an unmasculine coward, but it's like those words wouldn't affect a woman at all because she's already unmasculine. So it's like she's hysterical then. She's like, she's crazy, It's, it's like that's the way to shut up, like in this, like with those gender norms, that's the way to shut up a woman, is to call her hysterical, where the way to shut up a man is to call him coward.
Why?
Yeah, I think both of those are there, but kind of building off of that, I think neither gender can actually go home and then confidently rely on anybody to relate that story. They both feel as if they can't actually tell for maybe different reasons, but those experiences that they're having are just not going to render with somebody who doesn't have those experiences. They're too traumatic. They're, worlds apart. And so I guess that's kind of interesting.
Kylie?
I thought it was interesting comparing the idea of like gender being performative and then being like chucked into like this absolute survival scenario of like just awful things happening constantly. It's like they can't really like perform what's being asked like from the general. So like women are like, oh, this is like an awful scenario, and they're like feeling more like masculine, but like men are like being called like cowards for just trying to survive and like being like that's more like a feminine. It's really weird how it kind of like switches just in that scenario of not being able to perform it at all. It becomes like just weird.
Well, I mean, I think you're onto a really good point, which is the gender roles, at least in late 19th century and early 20th century, they exaggerated the difference between the genders. They're this or that, right? This list or that list, rational, emotional, mind, body, market, home, etc. And that breaks down when you start putting people in these sorts of situations. They all are having a similar experience. They're all responding in similar ways, and so they're both sort of failing at performing the extreme gender roles, and it's crashing into a sort of a common thing. And so they're both failing at their gender roles, but they're acting the same. And that's sort of the failure, is that they're not properly acting differently anymore.
To apply to your point, when Tosh cuts off her hair and everybody's like, oh, you're so unladylike for doing that, and she was like, well, there's fucking lice in my hair. I need to get them out so I'm not itching all the time. It's like you have to do what you have to do, and because of that, your gender roles are breaking down. You don't care at this point, because what's the point of conforming to them when you're just trying to survive?
Yeah.
When you mentioned they were all acting similar, but it's like they're all just acting human, but it's so weird that like the layering of like the performative gender roles of the 1800s on this has made them act like almost like inhuman. And like the response to this scenario would be inhuman, but like they can't do that because they're all people.
Yeah, no, that's true. Why?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Tosh apparently came from like an aristocratic background or somewhat connected to that, and yet she played more of that cat role, more of that strong person, even though that she probably came from that upper class toffee nose background. But she was forced to adapt and therefore did.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that as I was reading it again, that it is an interesting switch that she made the knowledgeable leader figure, the unconventional leader figure, be an aristocrat. But I think what she was doing was that there was a certain sense in which working class women were seen as simply failing at femininity. And so there's no way she could have made a working class woman a leader there. Because what she wanted was somebody who was feminine but then broke the mold sort of intentionally, willingly. And a working class woman, you couldn't tell she's breaking the mold because working class women are considered to be failing at womanhood anyway. And so if she's not doing it, it's just that she's failing. It's not that she's choosing not to. So she had to pick an aristocratic woman who clearly knows what the gender roles are and is breaking them, rather than a working class woman who would assume just didn't know them. If that makes sense. That middle class women assume that working class women simply didn't know how to be ladies and didn't know what femininity was but an aristocratic woman, there's no question she knows exactly what that is, and if she's choosing not to, there's a reason for it. And so I think she's picking Tosh as the substitute for Kat because there's a way that a working class man can have knowledge that a middle class man can sort of respect, and the working class man could break the rules intentionally. But a working class woman was just seen as inept or unladylike, or
What I was also thinking about is how some of the other characters that weren't aristocrats were trying to be way more ladylike. With I think BF.
Yeah.
She was like trying so hard to check Tosh when she was being vulgar or something, and being like, "Oh, that's just not how you act." But she wasn't an aristocrat. She was just trying to live up to those expectations.
Right, and that's also an interesting sense that people at the upper ends of socioeconomic classes can often bend and break the rules with impunity, whereas people in the middle are clinging to their status more desperately, and so they don't dare break the rules. The BF doesn't dare break the rules because her claim on being a lady is pretty shaky in the first place, so she has to keep clinging to those rules, whereas nobody doubts Tosh is a lady because she's an aristocrat, and so she can break the rules, which is kind of an interesting take on gender and class.